Hello, folks. We're going to move right into our next breakout session here, which is International Perspectives in Open Data in 2022. We've got Josh Dario here, Stephen Costa, and Barry Kong, and Natalie Carfy online. And so they're going to work us through an agenda that they have planned for us. So with that, why don't we bring them up on the screen? There we go. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Barry Kong. I'm the Executive Director of Open Government at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, and I'm excited to join you all today on our panel for International Open Data Perspectives. I just wanted to take a moment before we start to acknowledge that while we are all from across Canada and around the world today, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that since I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, I am on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I recognize that we're all attending this event from different places and are on different traditional Indigenous territories. So I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on that and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of the lands on which you're living and working. So just a big thank you to the Canadian Open Data Society for bringing us together for this phenomenal annual event. And thank you to the government of Yukon and the city of Whitehorse for welcoming all of the in-person participants. And finally, thank you to all the panelists who have joined me on this virtual stage for today's discussion. Many of you may recognize the panelists here today as they are our open data leaders from across the world, and discussions among international partners are essential as we continue to learn the importance of leveraging open data for economic impact, building partnerships, and releasing data in ways that create a maximum value for the end user. This exceptional group will share fresh perspectives that are sure to inspire. So on the panel today, we have Mercedes de los Santos. Mercedes is the Open Data Charters project manager and is responsible for coordinating the implementation of core projects. Over the last 9 years, she has spearheaded projects in the civil society sector, in Buenos Aires city government and Buenos Aires city legislature. Then after Mercedes will be Stephen Costa, the co-founder and executive director of Link Digital, an Australian digital services company focused on leveraging the open data for innovative solutions. In his current role, Stephen is responsible for the business development of Link Digital as a provider of open data service offerings to both private and public entities. Stephen is also the co-steward of the CKAN open source project. And finally, today we will have Josh Dario, who serves as a principal consultant at the Open Data Institute. In his role, Josh is responsible for leading consulting and advisory delivery at the Institute and building and growing strategic partnerships with commercial partners and government agencies through designing and delivering impactful mission-aligned projects. Welcome to you all. Now, Mercedes from the Open Data Charter is going to kick off our presentation today. So Mercedes, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, for the introduction, and thank you all for the invitation. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today. I will share my screen, so please let me know if you can see it well. Yeah, perfect. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Mercedes de los Santos. I'm a project manager at Open Data Charter, and I'm super glad to be part of the Canadian Open Data Summit. This is the first time that I participate in the Canadian Open Data Summit, so I'm really excited to share how this is work and to learn from other experience. I would like to introduce the Open Data Charter work Open Data Charter is a global collaboration between more than 170 governments and civil society organizations around the world, working together to collect and use data to address targeted policy challenges and progress development. With our national and subnational adopters, we work around 6 open data principles. As I don't have much time now, I would like to dive into one of them, which is the open by default. The idea of open by default is that any data governance or any data infrastructure should include the idea of being open by default in some point of the data cycle. We know that governance creates and collects data, and there's a limitation, of course, of what data can be open, but the principle should be that the data belongs to the citizens. So the data created by government should be open by default. These principles represent that a real shift in how government operates and how it interacts with citizens. The principles go on to tell us how we can bring about the culture change by suggesting government, establish a culture of openness, not only through legislative and policy measures, but also with the help of training and awareness programs, tools, guidelines, and communication strategies designed to make governance, civil society, and private sector representatives aware of the benefits of open data. But something that I would like to focus in my presentation, and that we think that it's the way from where the open data agenda will move forward, is about a big element of the third wave of open data that have been working for us the last few years. And that is the principle to publish with a purpose, pushing data with the purpose. Our 2018 strategy focuses on the growing recognition that opening up data in isolation is less effective than it can be if targeted at solving specific problems. I mean, publish with purpose can deliver more than publish, and they will come. So, as part of the promotion of open with a purpose, we started working on thematic open data policies, because we think that it's very important that the data should be used on the social policies and public policies with a big impact in the daily life, in the citizens' daily life. So we do this developing practical guidance to open up data in ways that can deliver concrete benefit to people. So for that, we create the Agriculture Open Up Guide, the Open Up Guide for Climate Action, the Anti-Corruption Open Up Guide, and the Open Up Guide for Land Governance. And the good news is now we are working in a gender issue because we are developing an Open Up Guide for care sector. These tools are aimed to be used by governments to collect, manage, and release sectoral data, understanding the specific standards that came into place to that theme, and promote civic engagement and data-driven decision-making. If you take a look at the Open Up Guide, you will see that it's a list of the most high-value data sets and all the standards that already exist. But let me do a double click on what it looks like. The Open Up Guide has a specific content, which is the key data set and a proposal of how data should be created, collect, store, share, and publish. And of course, the standard, what I mentioned before, that exists. Also, the guides include good data policies around framework, metadata, standards, data governance, among others. And one of the example that I would like to share in this summit is the implementation of the Open Up Guide for Climate Action in Uruguay. As an example that data should be published, thinking in the impact of the publication of that information. 2 years ago, we implemented the Open Up Guide in Uruguay because the government of Uruguay has a strong commitment to open data. So they become one of the first countries to test this guide and to begin empower the community of open data and climate change. This is very important to think about open data policies and the international open data discussion, because sometimes we think in the data interoperability, but we don't have in mind the people interoperability that it's very important to work in open data. For that reason, with Uruguay, we work to empower the connection and the discussion between the community of open data and the community of climate change. In the guide, there are 72 types of data relevant to climate action, and it deals with topics such as agriculture or transport use data. It provides a starting point to inquire about the state of openness of climate data, initiate dialogue with different stakeholders about what type of data are relevant in the national context and how they could be used in government sectors, civil society, and environmental movements. Some of these key findings in the Uruguay project is that 20 of 72 datasets have some degree of openness. Also, the Ministry of Environment and the AGESIC, which is the electronic agency and open data office, identify some priorities in this data as a waste and climate finance, and co-create a strategy for opening data. And it's very important to try to create a plan to publish that information, because all the information is not relevant for now, maybe, but we need to plan in different stage which data will be open with the time and with the work together with different areas of government. Now we are working in a second phase of the implementation, and it's and that stage is related with the stage that I mentioned before, because sometimes governments publish the information, but the citizens don't use that information. For that reason, it's very important that the open data project should be accomplished with a reuse or participatory exercise with the aim to citizens use that information. And of course, propose innovating projects. In that case, the 5 teams were selected to receive seed grant to develop data and climate change projects. One of them, for example, called Uruguay 2100, is the development of a web visualization application to raise awareness among the Uruguayan citizens about the impact of climate change in the coastal zone and changes in the ecosystem at the nation-wide level. The application will showcase an interactive map with different scenarios that can be sourced according to temperature levels, sea levels, and international commitment, among others. To finalize my presentation, I have to remark some points. Regarding to the last editions of the Global Data Barometer, the open data agendas are alive but not spreading. Although new national open data initiatives have launched since 2016, others have disappeared. However, where initiatives have been sustained, they are often better resourced and more embedded than they were in the past. So this defends the idea that open data principles are also embedded in a number of sectoral initiatives. I would like to close my presentation saying that Open Data Charter advocates for the governments to focus data publishing efforts to be guided by a purpose. And what we mean by that is really acknowledging the context really matters. Thank you so much. And I expect more questions in after my colleague's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. Stephen, are you prepped up?
Yep. I guess I got a couple of slides, so I'll drop that in as well and share. That be easier for the folks translating. So just 4 points I thought I'd make from an Australian perspective. Skills and capability in the public sector, the foundational 4, which is around organizational agency culture around data, and inventory of Australian government data with data sharing capabilities, and the maturity of open data programs, kind of an opinionated guesstimation of where I think things are at. Very biased and probably completely wrong, but it is a perspective. So data skills in the APS, there is focus. One of the areas of focus of Prime Minister and Cabinet is public data. They do have a skills and capability report that can be downloaded from their website and read. They do have courses that they've started to put on the APS Academy, the Australian Public Service Academy, around data literacy. And there is a professional stream. There's like 3 professional streams you can engage with the public sector, and one of those is around data literacy as well, or the data profession, I should say. So I think there's a very strong recognition that at an individual level, the Australian Public Service is wanting to build capabilities and skills for those who work with data, those who advise policy regarding data, those who are basically custodians of data. Whether that's shortfall or building capability for the future needs is really anyone's guess, but I would imagine there's a lot of work that can be done with data, and the skills are required. The next one is around the foundational 4. So this is a project that's coming out of the Office of the National Data Commissioner. We recently got our commissioner appointed after having an interim commissioner for a while, once the legislation was all put through. I believe this latest edition of the Foundation 4 was recently updated around August. With the previous version, I think this version is just a slight edit, but the real focus there is on agency maturity and culture, trying to give people some frameworks that can help with their guidance in culture surrounding data. So looking for leadership, strategy, governance, and asset discovery are the call outs of those foundational 4. And the last one there, data assets being identified, kind of follows into some of the programs that the Data Commissioner is also running. So the data inventories pilot program is underway with the objective of about 20% of Australian government agencies having their data inventoried. So that's federal government. And also a data place concept, which is around data sharing. So very easy overlap between open data and data sharing, in that open data is just sharing through an open license. So the offer to share is open and the acceptance is also open. You don't really need to trade on that. Whereas when you're sharing something that needs to form an agreement, then perhaps there's nuances around the offer. So there's some caveats around the offer to share data, revocable rights, etc., or fair use or acceptable use, or things like this. And then the person who would be reviewing that offer may need to accept, and their acceptance may come in the form of an agreement. So through those sorts of mechanisms, at least at the federal level, there is a data sharing program that's being trialed and initiated through the Data Commissioner as well. And that's rolling through. I mean, that's something that is, I think, pretty ubiquitous across government, intra-agency or inter-agency data sharing. And then the last slide is just around maturity, and where I see things, again, very opinionated, could be completely off, but from my very narrow focus and perspective, I see at the federal level, basically programs tending to rise to the maturity of the policy or agency. So if there isn't a strong data capability within an agency, then the programs tend to rise to a certain level, because one way or another, they just don't get the executive sponsorship or the executive agreement to go beyond a certain level. And that's similar with policy. I think we've all seen programs that are largely politically driven or policy driven in terms of the flags that they'd like to claim in the grounds, but without good execution to follow through and good culture and continuation of the aims of such policy, they tend to die off or just sort of peter out. Having said that, some good moves with Data.gov.au has moved into what I'd call a good technical agency, a good custodian for the project, the Open Data project, with the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And there is still very strong capability for leadership and innovation within the government organisation Data 61. 61 is our phone code, so Data Australia essentially. they've got a great project that I showcased a little bit earlier today called Terrier.js, and they have some great projects that they're working on that look quite good around digital twins and such. So it's a amalgamation of data plus, I guess, real use cases in regulated managed use cases in the wild for government. At the state and territory level, I think they're tending to rise the programs to the appetite for innovation in those states and territories. Sometimes the appetite for innovation is around economic development, sometimes it's political, sometimes it's competitive between states. And digital twins between the two largest states, New South Wales and Victoria, seems to be a bit of a competitive thing at the moment. There's a bit of focus there. Interagency data sharing programs. I think largely around the aim to improve service delivery is something that is a high focus. And enablement of data ecosystems beyond government into some of the areas that government does certainly touch on. So fintech, regtech, regulation technology, finance technology, etc. But the real areas where I think there's somewhat unbounded maturity or opportunity for such is really in specific agencies. So agencies that are already tending towards digital or data transformation projects. And because there's pervasive understanding of open data as a practice, it allows those projects, once they get scoped, once they get sort of determined in terms of the requirements, to be built or designed with more open data capabilities. So I think that is the real winner, or the real sort of indicator of good maturity across the public sector here, because that's where the game is at. I think if you've got a public program, you've got a real job to do, and you're building an information system, and you're thinking open data, then that's a great outcome. If you need to engage on service delivery and you want an open data component to that, that's a great outcome. So they're my updates. They're my perspectives, if you will. I'm happy to drop down to questions.
Stephen, thank you very much. In the maturity piece is very interesting to me, because in Canada, we're working to align with international standards and creating open data maturity models, measuring its impact and establishing guidelines for data governance and quality. So very, very interesting. So we really, we just want to make sure that we have time here for Josh, who happens to be in person at the summit.
I am.
So that's
Yes.
great. Josh,
was this supposed to be virtual or?
No. I wanted to really be there, but I would have loved to have been there, but I just couldn't with my schedule. But so Josh, over to you. The floor is yours, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Yes, really lovely to come over to the Yukon from London. My panelists are really I want to talk about sort of three different phases. That gets sorted. Hello. Okay, that sounds better. So three different phases or different trends that we've seen in the UK over the last sort of 10 years of open data, where that's kind of now and where that's going forward. As you may tell from my accent, I'm not British. I'm actually from Ottawa, so I'm kind of like the least international person to be talking about international things at a Canadian conference, but I've lived there for the last 10 years, most of which was at the Open Data Institute. So hopefully we can talk about some interesting things. So the first sort of phase trend was really around sort of the public sector focus. I won't spend too much time on this conceptually, because you all know what this is. The open government data is kind of a no-brainer. It's taxpayer data, so it really belongs to the public. So that's been a huge kind of movement within the UK over the last 10 years. A couple interesting bright spots from that I think other countries and even organizations can learn from are two organizations. So one is the TfL, that's the Transport for London, and that's the public sector body that looks after all public transit in London. They went on their sort of open data initiative in 2017, creating a unified open API for all the data that they hold and wanted to make public. This has had massive benefits to the economy of London, to customers, to road users, like I said, London itself and the TfL. There was an economic study that said that it generates about 130 million pounds per year in value. I mean, those studies are always sometimes a bit more art than science, but I think it shows that the clear value. I'm not sure exactly how much 130 million pounds is in Canadian dollars, but I know that it's less than it was a month ago. So the benefits from this are manifest. A big part is obviously saving time for passengers, so people can be better planning, more effective with their days. They're using public transit more, and that obviously has a lot of really important knock-on effects with reducing kind of carbon footprint. So you see the connection between open data and climate action already. It's also created a lot of commercial opportunities for third-party developers. So organizations are using that open data to provide services to their customers and a variety of different organizations. I think the most notable of which, at least in the UK, is called Citymapper, and they've been a great alternative to, say, Google Maps if you want to use mapping services. And then one that was maybe a bit less obvious from the outset is sort of the new data that TfL was getting back from their new data partners. So it's not really just a sort of one-way open data publishing, but it allows to generate those partnerships, those links, and then they could gain a lot back from that. So data that they weren't collecting was being collected by these partners that could then provide them insights. The next organization I want to quickly talk about is DEFRA, which is the Department for the Environment, Forestry and Rural Affairs. I think I got that. They went big in 2015, 2016 with their open data release. I think it was something like 10,000 data sets. It was a challenge set to them by the Secretary for the Environment, who at the time was actually Liz Truss. So I guess a bit of a high water mark in her career was, open data for the environment. And so that's powered a lot of really interesting services as well. So apps about sort of local rivers, the flooding risks, data around water quality. An interesting use case I really like from that is an organization called Surfers Against Sewage. And they're basically a bunch of surfers that live in Cornwall and have created a service for other surfers to know if they can or can't surf based on water quality. So great use of that data. There's been other maybe less, again, obvious ones as well. So Minecraft uses DEFRA data apparently, and archaeologists have used some of the LiDAR data that they've made open to discover Roman roads in the English countryside. So that's, I think, pretty cool. So those are some sort of bright spots of that first trend. But as Mercedes put it really well, that wasn't always super clear and easy. That was done through a very open it and they will come approach. And really what we've learned over time, and ODI is as guilty as any of saying open it and they will come, is that publishing with a purpose is a lot more beneficial. Having use cases in mind doesn't stifle innovation; it actually helps excel it. And so that's some big learnings that we've had and seen in the public sector. So going back to DEFRA, now they have these really advanced Earth observation data services that kind of take lots of complex satellite data, and analyze it using sort of most organizations don't have the kind of training, technology, resource to wrangle this data, and they provide kind of use cases for that. They provide it openly as well through API and download, but they're also serving a really big, valuable service by making that into a data service itself. Okay, second phase / trend. So this is private sector open data and data sharing, but sort of led by the public sector. So, kind of enabled by them or coerced by them, you could say. And there's kind of two styles I want to talk about today. So one is, relatively more carrot than stick, and the other is relatively more stick than carrot. So we'll start with the stick, and that is open banking. I'm not sure if people are very aware of this. It's really about sort of data sharing and the sharing of sensitive data around sort of transaction data with your current account through a very sort of safe ecosystem to trusted third parties in a consented fashion. So open banking is a bit of a misnomer, and it certainly doesn't help if you're really worried about privacy to call it open banking. But it has been an interesting success, I would say, that has allowed for a really big new ecosystem in data sharing. It does have standards for publishing open data that banks use to publish bank locations, ATM locations, information about their products and services. And it's kind of created a whole ecosystem of different, hundreds of different new services and businesses, and millions of pounds have come out of this, and it's now expanding through open finance to other aspects of banking and finance. But that needed lots of government intervention. That basically had to be regulated by the Competition and Markets Authority. The big banks would have never done it themselves. And so for that, you do really need a kind of stick with a little bit of carrot. That I think there are some benefits that have gone back to banks in terms of better services being created by partners, better KYC with their customers. But yeah, most of the benefits have gone to customers, to fintechs, and to sort of even challenger banks. So that's pretty interesting to see. The other side of it, which is more popular now because open banking was an extremely painful affair for the industry, for government, is more carrot-led. So if we look at some of the big industry movements right now, one is called open energy. And so that was done with a lot of funding. So instead of saying, we're going to force you to do it with regulation and policy, we're going to say, here's a bunch of money. If you want to build something that's great for the energy ecosystem, go have at it. So now that is a sort of an open and shared data sharing platform that is led in a consortium by Icebreaker One, a nonprofit that's very focused on net zero and net zero activities. And so that basically allows for open publishing, the ingestion and findability of open data, and through a membership model that allows sort of organizations and individuals that are involved in it to share sensitive data in a secure way. So the goal of that is to really allow for a more dynamic energy data ecosystem that can help kind of make the energy sector more efficient, more decarbonized. So that's sort of the goal there. We've seen similarly a project that we're working on with a consortium of water companies in the UK. It's called Stream, and this is the same idea for the water sector. Again, it was done with kind of basically a lot of carrot. Ofwat, the regulator, and the government said, here's a bunch of money, go build a giant sector-wide open data platform, and it's which is what they're doing right now. And there isn't any regulation kind of coming yet, but there might be in the future. But it's really about sort of having those incentives. So something that's really kind of interesting I've found about this is when you're having the public sector, private sector, other organizations like nonprofits and academia involved, it gets very complex. There's competing incentive systems. People want different things. And so in this complexity, it allows for a new form of data infrastructure, of data governance that we call data institutions. So data institutions, like the ones that are running open banking, open energy, will run Stream, are organizations that their primary or main purpose is to steward data on behalf of others, often towards sort of goals around social impact. So that could be benefiting consumers, civic engagement, the environment, those sorts of things. So you can see them as sort of social impact data intermediaries, and they've really come about from this sort of second trend. The third trend I want to finish on then is around private sector led. So this is much more nascent. We haven't seen as much of this yet, but I really do think that we're going to see it a lot more in the future, especially given those sort of regulatory pains that we've seen in the second trend. And even in the EU, they now are legislating for business to government data sharing within their Data Act. So businesses are really encouraged to sort of get ahead of that regulation and to be a bit more visionary, honestly. I think the world's best kind of organizations, companies, are the ones that realize that there are common challenges that the data that they hold will help face and help combat, and the ones that are really want to be at the top are doing that already. So we work extensively with Microsoft, for example, and their open data campaign. So there's a partnership with ourselves and GovLabs. If you saw Stefan's talk or his panel earlier, his organization is deeply involved in that, and that's around encouraging open data sharing in the private sector, in other places as well, building infrastructure that allows for more open data and more data sharing, and really facilitating data collaboration. So when it comes to Microsoft, for example, the open data that they're allowing is around the planetary computer, which is this massive data and analysis platform that makes open data available around air quality, biodiversity, oceans, solar, you name it in the climate and environment field. And our partnership with them has had a lot of really interesting sort of activities and work streams that we've worked on that I think are really educational for other businesses that want to be leaders in that sort of private sector data sharing way. One was an education open data challenge that we ran with them. So that was looking at connectivity data that Microsoft was holding that they made openly available and sort of brought in different organizations to play with in a data challenge sort of way and create new insights. And that was looking at sort of matching connectivity levels with remote schooling during the pandemic in the US. So seeing where that sort of data divide might be between the haves that have good connectivity are going to have really good outcomes when it comes to remote schooling, and those that will not. So I think that kind of work is really indicative, really important to see. We've also been supporting a host of different interesting collaborations, mostly focused on climate action. So one of those has actually been working with Mercedes and the Open Data Charter with their work on open climate data and Uruguay. So very nice to see you again, Mercedes. And then another one I find really interesting and has, I guess, some resonance maybe with this particular summit even is trying to improve open data sharing and the sort of ethical sharing of traditional knowledge with Maori communities and the government in New Zealand around sort of environmental data projects. So that's a really interesting, impactful, thorny space that we've been able to sort of work on with them. We've built databases around sort of water incidents and safety. We have been working on the carbon call, which is trying to help interoperability and standardization across carbon accounting and environmental reporting. So there's a lot of things that the private sector is able to do, should they, and they should sort of take a stance. What we're planning to see more in the future, and I was actually hoping to talk about a specific one today, but it's still a bit hush-hush, so you didn't hear it from me. But that's kind of companies coming together with kind of shared goals, a lot of data that they know is valuable, and trying to kind of combine that data, publish it openly, and kind of create solutions and services for the climate and beyond. So that's my little spiel today. So hopefully that was entertaining and interesting. And yeah, I guess we'll move it over to questions. Thank you very much.
Gosh, thank you so much. Really appreciate that, the different perspectives and projects and the trends. So I know that we are at 2:30 right now, but I was hoping at least to get one question in, if that's okay. And so it will be a pretty general question. So as a global community, we know that open data has the potential to address the important issues you have all raised, yet often open data initiatives can be viewed as isolated or siloed. So in your opinion, what do we need to do to work better together to advance the movement as a global community? So I open it up to perhaps Josh first, and then to Stephen, Mercedes, before a closeout. Thank you.
Damn, that's a hard question. I was hoping you'd pick one of the other ones first. Yeah, I think in terms of collaboration, what we've seen is that there's a growing acknowledgement that the common challenges that face us, whether they are on the climate side or on the health side, affect those across the private, the public, and third sectors, across different sectors, supply chains, and communities. And so focusing on that shared need to do something about it, and looking at what resources that each community and organization has, and kind of coming together, and that can be sort of the best way to really make that happen. That's not always possible. So in that sort of second phase I talked about, often it is government policy that's really needed to push that, and not waiting for others to be altruistic. But I think it's focusing on those commonalities, those shared goals, and those shared challenges. That is the best way forward.
Yeah, so I'll have a crack at answering as well. So I actually don't think there's much of an issue with fragmentation because there's quite a bit of complexity across the different sectors and across the different projects. But I think there can be some common goals and practices is just the practice. So if you're going to do some lawyering, there's a commonality in the way you do your lawyering or your accounting. If you're going to be a statistician, there's some commonalities there, a logistician. I think we need some kind of professional practice like a datastician, where we start to look at the abstract and how we can find the commonalities in the abstract and then have them equally applied in the specific. I think that would be quite helpful. But of course, the more we collaborate, the more we'll get to that outcome anyway.
Okay, yes. As I mentioned in my presentation, I think that we couldn't suppose that we will advance as a big community. I think that sometimes the participation needs, as a government, you need to look for that people at that community that want this data published and try to invite them in a participatory exercise, in a challenge, or in an initiative to propose different projects using data to solve different problems. But I think that we need to divide the work together in different thematic areas. And of course, we need to engage with users constantly and getting feedback from the beginning. So I think that it's very important to develop open data policies and design open data policies that actually include participation from the beginning. Because if you are going to decide about which is the public problem you want to solve without engaging with the people that are involved in the problem that you are trying to tackle, or with data reuser, so we don't know the demand of this data. So I think it's very important to get in that from the get-going is very important from the beginning, but trying to thinking in the different thematic areas and in different problems. I think there is a community for all the themes that we want to work on, but we need to try to promote this participation, to invite them to participate and use the data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your responses, all of your responses there, from making sure we have policies in place to support the ideas of grow. I like the idea of a statistician, definitely, Stephen. And then, of course, having inclusive participation at the beginning to develop these data policies and our programs and the projects that we do. So with that, we are now at the end of our panel today. So thank you very much to all our panelists, Mercedes, Stephen, and Josh, for this great conversation today. So thank you to our audience for tuning into this panel. And thank you again to the Canadian Open Data Society. So please do enjoy the rest of the summit, and wishing all our attendees a great afternoon and day 2 of CODS tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Just before we wrap and let the panel go, I do see a question. I do see a question here in the room. Maybe we can quickly address that before we wrap the session.
Yeah, it's just a quick question. So you talked earlier, Josh, about data acquisition from the private sector to the public sector. Were there any sort of barriers or challenges that you faced along the way, and how did you overcome them?
Yes, I mean, lots of barriers. The private sector is obviously not a monolith at all. So some organizations are really keen, and some are really not. I think the best way to sort of talk about it in broad strokes is to really sort of either make the business case or really prove like the value of that data sharing, and that could be something like financial around the bottom line for a private sector. It could be aligned with some of their missions and goals. So if there's clear environmental benefits, health benefits, that sort of thing, or if it's around kind of transparency and trust. So I think that, if without policy, and often you need policy, but without it, it's really about proving that value and that impact for them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great session. You know, it's the Canadian